I know it's probably tough to hear, but to hang in there because I promise you, you're not alone. There are thousands standing with you. And what would you like to say to those people that don't even know you, but they're going to hear this story and they're going to donate at fightthefines.com.au to help fund your freedom? What would you say to them?
Oh, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate anything and everything. I just want to get back home to see my son and my elderly mum.
Thank you, Grace, for joining us. Tell us from the beginning what happened.
Hi, Avi. So I live in Queensland. I went to Melbourne for 4 days to go and see my daughter and my two grandkids. My grandson's third birthday. So after the 4 days, I realised I had to go into lockdown in Melbourne. So did the 2 weeks in lockdown. And then I applied for the Queensland border pass to make sure that I could get back home. Everything filled out properly and everything went well, and it said on there that I'm fine, I can come back in without having to quarantine. So the next day I booked my flight to come home. Really excited. And then I got to the airport, to Brisbane airport, and as we were going through, they had the police escorting us pretty much to make sure we've all got border passes and all the rest. So I got to where the officer was and showed my border pass and said, okay, so where have you been? And I told him where I was, in Melbourne, and he said, nope, that's a hotspot. No, you can't, you have to quarantine. And I just looked at him and said, no, it says it on here, I don't need to quarantine. And he said, no, never.
How'd you feel in that moment?
I just burst into tears. I didn't know how else to feel.
Cameron, thanks for joining us, and thank you to you and Manny for taking on this case. What can you tell us?
Well, basically, Avi, the situation with Grace's case is that she has been given a border pass by the Queensland government on the 9th of June, and subsequently, after being led to believe that she doesn't need to quarantine on returning home to Queensland from her visiting in Victoria to family members, she's returned home on that representation, and upon entering Queensland has been told she has to quarantine for 2 weeks at her own expense in a government hotel facility.
Do you think it's right that you should be paying for your quarantine when they specifically told you you're not going to have to quarantine?
No, it's not right.
Well, I don't think so either. I don't think you should be quarantining when they tell you don't have to quarantine, and certainly not paying for it. And I know you probably feel really lonely right now in that small confined space that you're stuck in, but know this, you're not alone. You'll see when this video goes to air that there are thousands around Australia, if not the world, that are going to stand with you, and they're going to help your fight to release you. At fightthefines.com.au, they're going to help donate to pay for those legal fees. You've already spoken to the lawyers who have been working over the weekend to secure your release. How do you feel about that?
I'm just so unbelievably grateful for everything that you and Manny and everyone's done. I appreciate it so much.
It's hard to imagine, if any Australian who fills in any of these kind of government forms online, and then they, based on the outcome of whatever form it is, in this case, a border pass, it tells you a specific thing, and then you go and act upon it, like buy a ticket, board a flight, get ready to get back home, and then get hit with the exact opposite that was advised on the pass. Like, besides being morally wrong, how can Australians have any faith in our systems if you just can't believe, and the government can in fact not only force you into detention but charge you for it? Can't be right, can it?
Well, that's certainly the position that we'd like to think is the case. And ultimately the government does have a very wide set of powers in this country on both the state and the federal level, and the courts have been consistent in upholding that in the past. Our hope is that in the future, as we go forward in this new so-called COVID normal, that we're going to be able to have some more legal precedents set that are going to actually change the landscape more in the favour of civil liberties. But on the point of whether or not she can rely on the government's representations, the circumstances of her pass, her border pass, is that she was given a valid pass until the 23rd of June. So this pass she was given on the 9th of June was valid until the 23rd. She enters back into Queensland on the 11th. No one had notified her that the rules had subsequently changed on the 11th. So she was stuck with this situation. Now, the Queensland government could have very easily have sent her notifications before she arrived in Queensland when they were planning to change the rules, when they were planning to stick people with hotel quarantine. They could have easily told everyone who's got a border declaration or a border entry pass that things had changed, or they could have invalidated those border passes very easily. Instead, they decided to keep it all under wraps. They decided just a simple press note or whatever was good enough. And when people arrive back, whether they've seen it or not, they get stuck with the circumstances that the Queensland government determines. And within 2 days, that's the amount of change. The change went from you can return home to you have to do 2 weeks in basically mandatory detention in a hotel.
And there's no responsibility on me to let you know.
And there's no responsibility on us to let you know, except through the ordinary, channels of whatever the media publishes and whatever the government puts out in its own way. They don't have to notify you directly as to the effects it's going to have on your travel. And that's certainly something which is a very, very gross sort of abuse of authority. And it's very improper in the circumstances, we believe, because the government has the capacity to send out these notices. It should send out these notices rather than sticking people with the bill for 2 weeks of quarantine that they never consented to under any circumstances anyway.
Essentially, you came to Melbourne to visit your grandkids for your grandson's 3rd birthday. You copped the sudden 2-week lockdown on the chin. After being confined to a house for 2 weeks, unable to leave, you then did all the right things, applied online for the Queensland government's border pass. It specifically stated that you do not have to quarantine. So then you booked a flight because you wouldn't have gone if you had to quarantine.
No, exactly.
You booked that flight, you landed, you showed the personnel on the ground the border pass, and they said, nah, you're going to hotel quarantine. You're essentially going to another jail to lock down for a further, 14 days?
14 days.
Well, thank Cameron. I know you guys are fighting hard to get it released, and I also understand that if for whatever reason we fail there, there's potentials of this being a precedent case that defines what this new COVID normal we're going to have to live with is that right?
That's correct. So we have a number of options on the table at the moment that we're exploring, and this is just one of another cases that we're actually fighting in relation to these COVID laws, not only in Queensland but in New South Wales and around the country, that we're hoping to actually get into the courts, and we're hoping to actually set some precedents so that we can define some limitations on the power of government. At the end of the day, the system that we have in place affords the legislators and affords the bureaucrats a little bit too much power. And at the end of the day, we need to have some limitations and some checks and balances be put in place to protect the civil rights of Australian citizens, which are fundamental, vital human rights and dignities that need to be protected.
So paying for the hotel, paying for meals, everything.
Can you afford that?
Most definitely not.
On behalf of everybody that's joining this fightthefines.com.au campaign, I want to thank you and Manny. You've been doing some great work with our fightthefines.com.au people. Without you, I'd fear that our country would have no hope because there's no other lawyers actually really doing these and standing on the front line. So thank you so much.
We appreciate it, mate. And at the end of the day, this is why I can say on behalf of me and Manny, this is why we became lawyers. We became lawyers to stand up for the rights of people that are at disadvantage when they are dealing with basically an endless resourced government that can do basically whatever it wants in this country. So that is why we became lawyers.
And we're blessed for that, and we're better for that in Australia. Thank you, mate. Hang in there, and we're going to, you know, at the end of the day, this is not just about you. This is about the fact that you, as an Australian who went to visit your family and did all the right things according to these ever-changing COVID rules, got put in a position where now you're essentially being incarcerated and persecuted for doing the right thing. You're not alone. We're going to fight this together.
Thank you so much.
If you agree that Grace's story is important and you refuse to accept this as the new COVID norm here in Australia, make sure to share it far and wide, because the mainstream media, they won't tell her story. It doesn't suit their narrative. And if you want to help us in our fight for civil liberties in Australia, head over to fightthefines.com.au and donate what you can to our legal fund, fightthefines.com.au.